Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. The Trump rioter, known in the media as the QAnon Shaman, has been sentenced to 41 months in prison. And we're going to talk about the sentence. We're going to talk about consequences in general, the way that these court cases are going, and really what the philosophy or approach should be in terms of sentencing for these individuals. Now, to step back for a second and kind of set the stage, there are hundreds of alleged Trump rioters whose cases are pending right now. And we're starting to see sentences that are very mild, ranging all the way up to several years. Now, when we talk about consequences for the Trump riots, one side of that are the consequences for individuals that participated, people like the QAnon shaman, Jacob Chansley, and others. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. There's a whole other side to consequences, which is consequences for those that instigated it, those that created the environment in which half of the Republican Party or more believed that the election was actually won by Donald Trump and that Joe Biden stole it in some way. And thus it was in some way justified to go to Washington, D.C. on January 6th and do what they did. There have been no consequences for those people whatsoever. And that includes the former President Donald Trump himself. It includes people around Donald Trump. It includes members of the House of Representatives. It includes members of the Senate. It's a very, very long list. And when we talk about consequences for them, really, we're probably talking about political consequences. I don't think there's any chance, nor arguably even a legal basis for charges against someone like, I don't know, to pick someone, Madison Cawthorn. I don't know. The people that were going around fomenting and instigating. There's a question as to whether there will be political consequences for some of those people. The answer is also probably not, because most of them are in very red districts, safe districts. The people in the Senate, many aren't even up for re-election in 2022. So that's one side. That's not going particularly well. Now, to the sentences and to the news of today. We are starting to see sentences stack up for some of these rioters. I think it was the Monday bonus show, we talked about roughly the same amount of time, about 40 months for one of the other rioters. One of the most prominent rioters is this guy, Jacob Chansley, known as the QAnon Shaman. He has now been sentenced to 41 months. The man known as QAnon Shaman, who stormed the Senate chamber on January 6th, adorned in face paint and wearing a fur helmet with horns, was sentenced to 41 months behind bars on Wednesday. 34-year-old Jacob Chansley from Phoenix, Arizona, pleaded guilty in September to one felony count of obstruction for his role in trying to block the counting of the 2020 Electoral College votes. He faced up to 20 years in prison on the charge. Federal prosecutors themselves had only asked for 51 months. That was the longest requested sentence so far in the Trump riots. U.S. District Judge Royce Lamberth handed down a 41-month sentence and also 3 years probation once released. In sentencing Chansley, Lamberth said he thought Chansley was, quote, genuine in your remorse, but the severity of the crime warrants the sentence. What you did here was horrific, as you can now see. QAnon Shaman, of course, as we're showing you here, is this guy whose shirtless picture wearing the horn fur hat and the flag and the megaphone and the whole thing. Images of this guy went viral very, very quickly. Videos showed him inside and outside the Capitol building, yelling at police officers, leading a mob, eventually getting into the Senate chamber, where he scrawled, "It's only a matter of time. Justice is coming," on paper covering the desk where Mike Pence had been presiding minutes earlier. He was in court yesterday with a beard, a green prison jumpsuit, addressed the court, referenced Jesus, Gandhi, and the movie Shawshank Redemption, expressed remorse, and said he would do everything differently. "I was wrong for entering the Capitol. I have no excuse. The behavior is indefensible." Now, Chansley asked for a time served, meaning he gets credit for the time he's already spent behind bars, saying he's not dangerous, he's not violent, he's not an insurrectionist or a domestic terrorist, and he's nothing like the other people he has been incarcerated with. So what's the takeaway here, right? First of all, There are people who are annoyed at only 41 months. A few things to note. First of all, the prosecutors only asked for 51 months. So oftentimes we see could be 20 years. When prosecutors say, given the circumstances, we're only asking for 51 months, it's rare, not unheard of, but rare that judges sentence people to more than prosecution asks for. Number two, he did take a guilty plea and he did show remorse. Now, we could say the remorse isn't genuine. The judge felt that it was. But it is one of these situations where if he were, the earlier sentences are increasingly people who are taking pleas. It would be reasonable to think that those who are going to push not guilty, maybe go to trial, etc., if they are found guilty, we could see even longer sentences. Trials take longer than pleas, all else being equal. So we won't know about those sentences for a period of time. Also, I got a couple emails from people saying, why wasn't this guy charged with treason? That is very, very difficult. And typically prosecutors are not going to do that unless they are very confident in the evidence, and state of mind is a factor there. Same with something like sedition. So that's just really tough. It's not surprising that the QAnon shaman was not charged with treason. Now, the Fox News perspective on this, at least the perspective of Fox News contributor Will Cain, is that the QAnon shaman was brainwashed, I guess, by the left while he was in custody.
Insidious part, Tucker, he was submitted to, and he did submit to some type of brainwashing. I mean, they have made all of these January 6th defendants essentially repent from any beliefs they ever had and echo critical race theory ideas, read the right books, and tell a judge they apologize for everyone and everything they've ever been. It's really gross, and it's a violation of due process, and it's just a violation of our sense of justice.
Now, I don't know if the references to Gandhi or whatever were part of that. I'm not really sure. But that's what we might call an alternative perspective. And that's actually something that's being repeated a lot by the right, which is these alleged insurrectionists are not only being treated unfairly, some of them, by being kept detained in pretrial detention. They're not allowed out on bail, or they can't afford it. They're also being brainwashed as the cases against them are going forward. Okay. So overall, the prison sentences are getting longer and longer. In the last week, we saw the two longest prison sentences of above 40 months. The lesser charges for the Trump rioters are kind of being moved out of the way first. And I expect that some of these are going to get longer and longer over time. One thing that is curious is, why aren't Trump supporters angry that the rioters are sort of being left out to dry? They did the thing that they believed Trump wanted them to do. They showed up. They tried to interfere with the count. They tried to prevent Joe Biden from becoming president. They did the thing that Trump thought was right. Remember, Trump in the video on January 6th said, it's time to go home, but I get why you're here. Makes sense that you're here. You're doing a beautiful thing. We love you, I believe he said. But now they're just kind of being left out to dry. Why aren't they all furious with Trump about that? I don't know. Just a question. I want to talk briefly about something going on in Poland. Now, I've mentioned before, there are a number of epicenters of nationalism of different kinds, as well as anti-Semitism, which often go very much together in Europe. Poland, sadly, is one of those places. And I want to tell you about what's been going on there. Death to Jews was being chanted by Polish nationalists at a rally during which they were burning books about Jews in Poland. This is 2021. Polish nationalists shouted death to Jews as they burned a book representing a historic pact protecting the rights of Poland's Jews. The book burning at a rally in Kalisz, a city of about 100,000, 120 miles southwest of Warsaw, was part of a series of nationalist events last week. National Independence Day, which is the anniversary of when Poland regained sovereignty in 1918. Videos and eyewitness accounts on social media show a far-right activist whose name I'm not even going to try to pronounce, lit a red-covered book meant to symbolize the statue of Kalisz, The document, issued in 1264 by Prince Boleslaw the Pious, regulated the legal status of Jews living in Poland and afforded some protection through penalizing attacks on them. The statute served as the legal foundation for relations between non-Jews and Jews in Poland. This guy poured a flammable liquid on the book and lit it on fire. The crowd was chanting "Death to Jews." Some chanted "No to Poland, yes to Poland." Poland is both the Hebrew language name for Poland and the name of the main Jewish museum in Warsaw. Police are studying the footage, and the EU coordinator for fighting anti-Semitism, Katarina von Schnurbein, wrote on Twitter, "These pictures send shivers down the spine." Other large nationalist events also taking place in Poland. You know, it's really sad to me what's going on in Poland. As I think mentioned before, my family, Jews from Eastern Europe, coming from really two main places: Ukraine on my dad's side, and Poland and Romania on my mom's side. My grandfather was actually born in Poland, fled Poland when he was 5 in 1929 to Argentina. And Poland is a place where the Jewish population was quite literally decimated or more through World War II. And it is still a place where there is disgusting hostility, open hostility to Jews. There's this crazy story I may have told before. A few years ago, when my dad had a conference in Poland, he was walking around I forget what city it was in, but there were some sort of notable homes in which I think it was like Jews were hidden during the Holocaust or something like that. You know, notable places, and it's a place where tour groups go. And there was a group of college students doing a survey of folks who were there. And they said to my dad, "Do you want? Can we interview you for this survey?" My dad says, "Sure." And one of the questions is, how much would you be bothered if Jews moved in next door to you? And the options were a little bit, a moderate amount, a lot, and I would move out because it would bother me so much. And my dad pointed out, you know, with the language barrier to some degree that existed there, everybody trying to speak English, why isn't it an option that I might not be bothered at all by Jews moving in next to me? It's sort of a strange absence of an option. And it sort of struck the interviewers as like, oh yeah, maybe that should be an option. It didn't even occur to us that maybe that's a reasonable option. So even like, this is an example of how this was not presumably an overtly anti-Semitic study that was being done, but the absence of "I wouldn't be bothered if Jews moved in next door" was very strange. And there's kind of this underlying thing that's still there, entrenched in some way in parts of Poland. So that's what's going on in Poland. We've been covering the rise of nationalism in Europe and different countries, and very, very scary stuff. You can find me on Twitter at @dpacman. We're going to take a quick break and be right back after this. One of our sponsors is Blinkist, who's been supporting the David Pakman Show longer than any other sponsor. Blinkist is the app that lets you listen to or read an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. Blinkist is the way to absorb those books you can't make time for. Blinkist takes top nonfiction titles, pulls out the book's key takeaways and insights, and gives it to you in the form of a text or audio explainer that you can consume in 15 minutes. With Blinkist, now you actually do have time to learn about all the things you've been wanting to tackle. On the Blinkist app, I just listened to This Is Your Mind on Plants by the great Michael Pollan. Super interesting, the history of caffeine and so many other things. Blinkist has you covered on podcasts too. Blinkist takes long episodes of popular podcasts and distills them into audio you can listen to in 15 minutes. With Blinkist, you can become knowledgeable about so many different things. You can have conversations with people about more topics. Blinkist makes you more well-rounded. Try Blinkist for free and get 25% off a subscription. Go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. The link is down below. You can find the David Pakman Show subreddit at davidpakman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT. There are now more than 33,000 of our viewers and listeners who are subscribed there for free. You can post your thoughts about any of the stories we talk about, stories you want me to talk about, or anything else that's on your mind. A few interesting posts that I spotted this morning. User Pumpkin Pie says, when it comes to messaging, the right has a lot more upside from the Rittenhouse trial than the left, no matter the outcome. I know this probably isn't a popular view on a left-leaning subreddit. Just hear me out. I don't think it's smart for the left to put all their chips on the Rittenhouse case. Agreed. If Rittenhouse is found innocent, well, remember, it would be not guilty. The right gets to take a victory lap. Meanwhile, the left is stuck with complaining about how unfair the world is. I'm already cringing at the meltdowns we're going to see. If Rittenhouse is found guilty, the right gets a new martyr going into the midterms. The left has to admit the system worked, which undermines their argument about how broken the justice system is and ultimately seems self-contradicting. What are your thoughts? I agree 100%. I've been talking about this for a long time. Either way, the right wins on the Rittenhouse trial. They will either make him a hero or they will make him a martyr. And the hero lionization has already started. I played for you the interview that Wendy Rittenhouse, Kyle Rittenhouse's mom, did with Sean Hannity on Fox News late last week. And it was all about Kyle is the victim and he's so great. And the media is bad and the prosecutors are bad and Democrats are bad. Everybody's just bad, bad, bad and unfair. And if we're going to come to a fork in the road with the verdict, which could be hours away, could be days away. We don't know. The jury is deliberating as we are filming today. If it's all not guilty, it is considered a vindication of what Kyle Rittenhouse did. It will also embolden vigilantism, the idea that you can bring a gun into a situation that is an optional situation, create a situation in which you feel threatened for your life, shoot people in self-defense. In the case of Joseph Rosenbaum, 4 times, not 3, not once, even though the first shot was disabling by everything we know, and then be found not guilty. So it will encourage vigilantism. That's going to be if it's all not guilty. If it's all guilty, it will be a biased trial that never should have been filed. This kid's being made an example out of, and he's the victim. And whatever time he serves in prison will be considered his penance as the martyr that he will be made. Now, there's also a completely plausible situation where you get a mix of things. You get not guilty on the major charges as written, but maybe guilty of some lesser included charges, or maybe guilty on one of the minor charges and not guilty on the major charges. And then it's just going to be a propaganda war. But needless to say, the left has very little to gain from either outcome, justice aside, whatever you believe to be justice aside. And the right is going to be using this kid as either a hero or a martyr for the foreseeable future. Very, very accurate statement. Another post I want to highlight from Reflex Point is what happened to the Hatriot Mail segment. Those were hilarious with the voice actor. Did haters stop sending David emails? Someone posted that there were legal reasons for why we stopped it. There's no legal reasons why we stopped Hatriot Mail, but I've told the story before and I'll tell it again. When we stopped doing Hatriot Mail, it was sort of in the heat of the 2020 election. We were receiving way more death threats than ever. We were receiving things in the mail that were more concerning than ever. And in speaking with my contacts at the FBI and other law enforcement agencies and kind of just and our security consultant, quite frankly, and going over the totality of everything, they felt, listen, at least for now, the Hatriot Mail thing is generating a lot of noise relative to the signal. And it's going to make it harder to more seriously to discern the real threats that need to be looked into. And so it wasn't a legal recommendation. It was really more of a security recommendation. And Hatriot Mail guy completely understood. And this was a time when, as I've mentioned before, FBI has shown up at the houses of people that have sent us threats to talk to them and evaluate whether they presented bona fide threats. And so we made the decision, because things have so escalated and the number of threats was so high, that we want to do anything we can not to encourage more potential noise and allow us to discern the signal. Will it ever come back? Maybe. We're going to look into that. But we decided to cancel it out because of the craziness of the 2020 election. This also relates to, as many of you know, we have a second studio and a lot of other things that are going on. Okay, so it's all related to that. I think I will leave it there. Join the discussion at davidpakman.com/Reddit. You know, when the FBI does a raid, they already probably have a pretty good case and a pretty substantive suspicion about wrongdoing that has taken place. The FBI has raided the home of radical Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert's ex-campaign manager. This is not a good sign for Lauren Boebert. Let's read this article from Salon by Igor Derish. The FBI on Tuesday raided the home of a Colorado election clerk and 3 others in an investigation, into a voting system security breach. Mesa County Clerk Tina Peters, a Republican, was accused by state officials in August of helping to leak voting system passwords to a right-wing blog. I thought the left was doing the voter fraud. Peters later appeared at MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell's conspiracy-laden cyber symposium, or symposium, as Mike Pillow refers to it, where the pillow magnate promised but failed to produce evidence of election rigging. Peters later briefly went into hiding with Lindell's help amid FBI scrutiny. We covered that when it happened. You might remember we did the story. Mike Pillow is helping to hide an official accused of tampering. So that's this individual. On Tuesday morning, the FBI and local prosecutors raided Peters' home. We executed 4 federally court-authorized operations today to gather evidence in connection with the investigation. We did so with assistance from the DA's office, from the 21st Judicial District, the Attorney General's office, and the FBI, said District Attorney Dan Rubenstein. Yes, Dan Rubenstein. And yes, there are already anti-Semitic comments on the fact that this took place. If you look online at the comments, not encouraging you to do it, but you can. Peters is in an interview on Lindell's online streaming channel, said the raid left her, quote, terrified. The FBI also raided a home in Garfield County. Lindell said one of the homes raided belongs to Sharona Bishop, a Garfield County resident who served as Lauren Boebert's campaign manager. Bishop has been one of Peters' most prominent allies in stoking unfounded allegations of voting machine problems in the election, and hinted at a rally last month that she was privy to unreleased data from Mesa County. This is every element of this is absolutely crazy. The FBI raided my home as of 6 a.m. this morning, accusing me of committing a crime. They raided the homes of my friends, mostly older women. I was terrified. They used a battering ram to destroy one of her friend's front doors. They took all my electronics. They were soldiers in combat gear, not men in suits with badges. They looked like they were in a combat zone. Man, you know, the same. It's so funny because we've been against no-knock warrants for so long, obviously for nonviolent offenses. And then beyond that, we can have a conversation. These folks have been for no-knock warrants forever. And now all of a sudden they're saying they're coming in like it's a war zone. Yes, that's what we've been saying all along. And the allegations in this entire fiasco are pretty wild. They include that the elections clerk gave out passwords to their systems, deliberately ran from the FBI with the help of Mike Pillow helping to hide them. But we're supposed to believe it's the Democrats that committed the election fraud, given that this is what's going on. It's crazy. It is absolutely crazy. And they probably have something very serious here. And whether it will hit Lauren Boebert, we just don't know yet, but it very well may. Remember, when we talk about the FBI in recent years raiding people from the Republican Party, we are aware of folks who shared internal campaign materials with Russia. We have folks associated with Trump who were subsequently indicted for tax evasion, bank fraud. Remember Michael Cohen? Some of the folks who remained friendly with Donald Trump ultimately received pardons for the things they were convicted of. But when the FBI starts the raids, it's not looking particularly good. FBI agents don't tend to go after political staffers, ex-campaign managers, etc., unless they have a really serious case already. Remember some of you might remember this, you may not. There was that Congressman Jefferson whose office and home were raided, and there were bricks of cash in the freezer. And the FBI already knew exactly what they were looking for. At the point that the raids start, they already have a lot of information, and that seems to be exactly what is going on here. So do you believe it will eventually hit Lauren Boebert, I guess, is the main question I have for you right now. Let me know your thoughts, and we're going to have more coverage of this on our Instagram, which you can find at David Pakman Show. We also, maybe tomorrow, maybe Monday, will be announcing the next viewer town hall. The one we did in October went wild, extremely popular event where everybody gets to call in. And of course, members get priority. We'll be announcing the next one for early December tomorrow or Monday. So stay tuned for that. We're going to take a quick break and be right back. Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpakman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 for a huge discount. Joinpakman.com. It's a great pleasure today to be speaking with Geoffrey West, who's a theoretical physicist and professor at the Santa Fe Institute. One of his great books, which I recently read, is Scale, the Universal Laws of Growth, Innovation, Sustainability, and the Pace of Life in Organisms, Cities, Economies, and Companies. Professor West, it's so great having you on.
Hey, David, thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to be on.
So I want to start with something very basic just to kind of get the audience acquainted
Sure.
with the subject matter of the book. When we talk about scale in life, we can apply this to the human body. We can apply this across species. We can look at businesses, cities, etc., as you do. How did you first come into being interested in this concept of scale in life?
Well, I think really it originates, I'm a theoretical physicist in terms of my training and my career, dealing with fundamental questions in physics, quarks and gluons and string theory and evolution of the universe, etc. Those big questions. But in that, a major theme in that, and in fact, across physics and all engineering and technology, is the question of scale. How do you scale up? What happens if you scale up a body, if you scale up a building, if you scale up the universe? Some of these might be hypothetical questions, but some of them are, very seriously practical questions that we have to face in society. So I got interested from fundamental physics, but realizing, and that was sort of the thing later in my career, that this had implications, just as you said, across the entire spectrum of the world around us.
In the book, you give examples of aspects of life that scale linearly, sublinearly, or superlinearly. And this gives rise to certain efficiencies and inefficiencies that we can identify. A number, we couldn't possibly talk about every interesting anecdote that you include in the book. But again, to give the audience some idea of what we're talking about, could you give us one example of each of these three phenomena in life that can be observed?
Sure, yes. So the simplest is linear. Linear simply means if I double the size of the system, I get something twice as big. That's simply so. For example, if you double the size of a city, not surprisingly, you sort of get twice as many dwellings, let's call it that way, twice as many houses, because each person, so to speak, needs a place to live. So that's linear. So that's not surprising. But the sublinear, what we call sublinear, is when if you double the size, you don't get twice as much, but you get less than twice as much. So, for example, to take a different system, at mammals. We're a mammal, and we go from a shrew to a mouse to us, to elephants and blue whales. And what is amazing is if you look at any quantity that describes them, any physiological variable like the number of heartbeats, the length of the aorta, how long they live, these scale in a very regular, systematic way. And one of the most fundamental quantities is metabolic rate, how much food you need each day to stay alive. And if you doubled the size of an organism, or you looked at one that's twice the size of another, you might have naively expected, well, you need twice as much food, you have twice as many cells. No,
Right.
You actually need, roughly speaking, 3/4 as much. You save 25% with each saving. That's called sublinear scaling and is a manifestation of a systematic economy of scale.
So before you give us an example of superlinear,
Yeah.
To think about that example, you could, in a sense, have an individual that weighs twice as much as another. They don't need twice the food. They only need 75% more. It's more efficient on a per pound basis in that sense.
Yes. What I would like to talk about here is less about those within species than across species. We can also discuss scaling. We can also discuss scaling within. It's slightly different.
Sure.
But if you just look at just across species or across different mammals, then there's this saving. So put slightly differently, each cell in your body, if you double the size, actually requires less energy the bigger you are. And by the way, that feeds into why it is that bigger animals live much longer than smaller ones, because they're using less energy to support the same gram of tissue or the same cell. So it's a systematic economy of scale. And by the way, we see that in our cities. It's the same thing in terms of our infrastructure. You double the size of a city. I said you need twice as many houses, but you only need about 85% as many roads or 85% as much electrical lines. So it's quite similar to biology, except the saving is sort of 15% with each doubling rather than 25%. But it's, again, an economy of scale, sublinear scaling.
Now, an example of superlinear scaling.
Yeah, so superlinear scaling is quite fascinating because it really does not occur in the natural biosphere. It's almost all sublinear scaling, and the biosphere is incredibly efficient. It's this economy of scale permeates. On the other hand, but social systems, socioeconomic systems, have the opposite behavior. And that comes about because socioeconomic systems are driven by social networks, interaction between people like you and I are doing, and we build on each other in terms of the conversation. And that means the bigger you are, instead of having the less per capita, so to speak, you have the more per capita. So the example would be, for example, if you asked how many patents, how many ideas are created in a city, and look at it as a function of the size of a city. So again, totally naively, if you double the size of the city, that means you have twice as many people. Well, you might get twice as many patents. No, you actually get another 15% added every time you double. So the bigger the city, the more ideas are created, and that's because there are more social interactions and so on. And the more of all socioeconomic activity, the higher the wages per capita, and so on and so forth.
So we would expect that in a 1 million person city, there would be more patents than in the sum total of 100,000 person cities.
Exactly. That's a very nice way of saying it, and a way we often say it is like that. I think it's a very powerful way of saying you gain tremendously by bringing people together rather than divvying them up into groups, subgroups, which act autonomously. And of course, you gain something by being autonomous. I mean, that's nothing to do with quality of life, for example. But in terms of sort of material kinds of metrics, bigger is better.
In the book, a fascinating example of this that you give is you compare, for example, a very, very small animal like a mouse to an elephant. And you say, well, the elephant lives a lot longer in terms of time. The elephant also has a much slower heartbeat. And so over the course of the life of a mouse and an elephant, even though the elephant is here for many more years, its heart beats more slowly, and both the mouse and the elephant would have roughly the same number of heartbeats per lifetime. That's quite fascinating. What is the underlying principle that is guiding that?
Yes, no, it is. It's quite fascinating that the number of heartbeats in a lifespan, if you look across all mammals from the smallest to the largest, is roughly the same, about 1.5 billion. And what is underlying that, and all of the scaling laws, is networks. It's the fact that all these things are controlled by networks, and all the work that I did was in terms of deriving the concepts and the mathematics that show you where these scaling laws come from, and in particular where this scaling law, this invariance, so to speak, this constancy of heartbeats comes from. And indeed, let me go back to something I said earlier, just to give you a sense of that, is that I said that the bigger you are, the less energy needed per cell to stay alive. So your cells are working less hard than your cats or dogs, but they're working harder than your elephants, so to speak. And so the bigger you are, the less hard the cells work. Therefore, less damage is done within the cell and in transporting energy and information through these networks. Therefore, you can live longer because you're doing less damage. So that's sort of the sort of simple idea behind it. You live longer if you're bigger because you do less damage, transporting energy, information, and resources to the cells to keep you alive. And so that causes the decrease. And in fact, all rates basically slow down the bigger you are in a systematic way, so that if you look through the right lens, it's not just that lifespans are the same, so to speak. That is, if you measure them by heartbeats, but your growth rates and everything else is sort of the same. They all rescale to look quite similar if you rescale accordingly. So it brings up sort of a speculative question. Even though a mouse lives 2 years and a whale lives 125 years, maybe in a certain sense, experientially, it's the same. Because all processes have rescaled appropriately.
Yeah, this is often brought up when people talk about their dogs, quite frankly, where they say, we experience the dog's life as being relatively short compared to ours. But if we account for all of these systems you're talking about, the dog may experience a life that to it feels just as long as ours. We just don't know.
We don't know. And of course, as I say, it's speculative.
Yeah.
And by the way, I want to add one major caveat to that.
Yeah.
We are one of those mammals. And indeed, if you look at us as sort of biologically, meaning when we were hunter-gatherers, before we discovered language, social networks, innovation, and created all the marvelous things that we do now, when we were purely biological, we fit perfectly on all these scaling curves. We had the right metabolic rate. We lived 30 or 40 years. Now, some of your listeners may have already realized that 1.5 billion heartbeats corresponds for a human being to about 30 or 40 years, which of course was the lifespan of human beings on the average until maybe only 100 years ago. My great-great-grandfather, his life expectancy was about 45, and that was typical I come from England in the United Kingdom, but it was also typical in the United States. So then we violated that. So we have completely violated the scaling law in terms of our metabolism. We now, even though biologically we only use 2,000 food calories a day, but in fact, the amount of energy we need to have this kind of standard and quality of life is more like 100 times that. So all of our metrics get distorted, and we've separated ourselves from this marvelous unity and integration of nature.
Let's dig into exactly that topic, because there's so many different aspects of what you talk about that are relevant to this idea of human longevity. First, I guess, to kind of establish a level playing field, is it not true that even when the average life expectancy at birth was 40 or 45, that was significantly influenced by high infant mortality, and that if one made it to, say, age 20, their odds of becoming much older were actually quite similar to what they are today? Is that not a factor?
Yeah, it's roughly true. It's still nevertheless true that, so let me give you some statistics. In about 1830, the lifespan of a human being on the planet was about 35, maybe. In what became developed countries, that number was more like 45, 40, early 40s, but it increased if you took out infant mortality. If you just remove those that died before age 1, because in the natural state, we're supposed to have, 10 to 12 children and 3 or 4 are supposed to die. I hate to put it so crassly. And so if you take out those that died in infancy, the number does increase to 40, 45. But then, just as you say, if you make it beyond, I forget the age exactly, but if you make it sort of age 10, 12, and so on, through your teens, your likelihood of reaching 60 is now not as high as it is now, that's for sure, but is already significantly increased. And indeed, people did live. I mean, there were, we obviously know historically, people that lived to 60, 80, even 100, obviously, but they were outliers and a long tail in the distribution of ages. So, and the biggest change, by the way, that took place in increasing longevity took place in the 19th century with the introduction of access to clean water.
Right.
And hygiene and putting in sewers and so on has had the biggest increase in our longevity because up to then, the overwhelming majority of people did not wash themselves, obviously didn't have access to hygiene.
We're going to pause our interview with Professor Geoffrey West there. We will post the full interview to our YouTube channel. Don't miss it. Absolutely fascinating. The YouTube channel, of course, youtube.com/The David Pakman Show. If you value what we do at The David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind-the-scenes videos, the daily bonus show, the commercial-free daily show, as well as special discounts on merch, including hats, hoodies, mugs, and t-shirts. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. I've been really hopeful that I was never again going to have to mention the name Sherry Tenpenny to you. It's a horrible name, not on principle, but because of who Sherry Tenpenny is. You may or may not remember that Sherry Tenpenny is this anti-vaccine osteopathic physician who believes that vaccines cause autism, who previously made all sorts of wild statements about COVID and about vaccination. She is back, and she is now saying that vaccinating children, which is the next phase of getting out of this pandemic, we got to get everybody vaccinated, or as close to everybody as possible. We now can vaccinate 5 to 11-year-olds with the Pfizer vaccine. Dr. Tenpenny is back saying that's like a late-term abortion. If you give a vaccine to a kid, it's like a really, really, really late-term abortion. Now, as a reminder, this is from a few months ago. Here is Sherry Tenpenny saying that we really shouldn't be afraid of COVID, but she is spreading all sorts of horrible lies about the vaccines to make people afraid. Remember this? This was months ago. Take a look.
Thinking if you can think of any other product in any other industry that has killed more than 5,000 people stated in the VAERS database, and even if only half of those are true, 2,500 deaths in 6 months of use, and it's still full court press, full steam ahead. So it makes one have to wonder why. Why are we still doing this? Why are we putting people into nursing homes like that happened in New York and put people with known COVID into place?
Yeah. Tenpenny also promotes conspiracies about 5G cell phone networks and more. Let's take a listen to that.
And some of the information that I think had been discussed in your podcast related to EMF frequencies.
That was a thought.
And
it was because right now we're all kind of hypothesizing. I mean, what is it that's actually being transmitted that's causing all of these things? Is it a combination of the protein, which now we're finding has a metal attached to it? I'm sure you've seen the pictures all over the internet of people who've had these shots and now they're magnetized. They can put a key on their forehead, it sticks. They can put spoons and forks all over them and they can stick. Because now we think that there's a metal piece to that. There's been people who've long suspected that there was some sort of an interface, yet to be defined, an interface between what's being injected in these shots and all of the 5G towers. Not proven yet, but we're trying to figure out what is it that's being transmitted to these unvaccinated people.
So this is someone who has made now, I don't know about a career, but she's made herself quite prominent as a sort of a darling of the anti-vaccine and conspiracy movement. She's been against masks, even though we have scientific peer-reviewed studies about the effectiveness of masks. She's against vaccines. She says the vaccines can kill you. They can cause autoimmune disease, that some people will die from the vaccine directly and others are just going to get really, really sick and get long-term diseases, maybe 42 days out, maybe a year out, etc. On and on and on. Sperm quality claims, etc. So now she has resurfaced at this. How many people that we have covered ended up at this very place, the Reawaken America rally over the weekend in San Antonio? Michael Flynn was there. I think Mike Pillow was there. Just so many people that we follow were at this absolutely horrible event. Right-wing pastor John Hagee did the event at the Cornerstone Church in San Antonio, Texas. Here is Tenpenny saying a lot of crazy things, dangerous things, including that giving a kid a vaccine is like an abortion.
People have got to start saying to their bosses who are requiring them to get tested if they don't get a shot, that you need to start saying to them, torture is illegal in the United States of America.
Now, that will not work. The advice that Tenpenny gives will not work. Vaccine requirements are legal. A vaccine isn't torture. You will probably lose your job if you follow Tenpenny's advice.
And you repeatedly testing me for being non-compliant and disobedient is torture.
COVID tests are not torture either. You're going to lose your job if you do what she says.
I think that we're going to be writing that up and we're going to sending it into the EEOC and we're going to start accusing you and these policies of being torture.
Now, the EEOC is the Equal Employment Opportunity Council. I think it's that. Anyway, the idea that if you write to them and say it's torture to test an employee, that the EEOC is going to get involved. It's a waste of time. Everything she says is a waste of time.
Call a spade a spade. And we know that this is murder by injection, right? And you're supposed to give this as sacrificing your children to Balak, to Baal, child sacrifice.
So now, as if it wasn't off the rails before, now they bring in all of this mark of the beast, child sacrifice, weird scriptural stuff.
Being resurged in these final days from the Babylonian mystery schools.
Wait a second. I thought she was here as an osteopathic doctor. What does Baal have to do with that?
Tower of Babel and the descendants of Nimrod. And this is what is happening. Yeah. And if you see anybody participating in this, you need to be challenging them of what they are doing to their spirituality and what they are sacrificing their children to. You know, I had a really good friend who said, you know, we've sacrificed over 60 million unborn babies in abortion. We have multiple states in this country who actually allow late-term abortion. Now we are doing very, 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 very late-term abortion by killing 5-year-olds.
So she is saying, you give a 5-year-old a vaccine, they're going to die. It's like an abortion.
This is happening in America, people. And it's your job to stop everybody you know and wake them up and shove it in their face. And if they defund you off of social media, who cares?
If they defund you off of social media, is this a grifter, or is it a sick woman, or is it both?
Now it's about trying to save unborn babies and pregnant women. It's about they now are actually starting a trial to give these shots to 6-month-olds. This is child sacrifice. This is the resurgence of child sacrifice from the days of the Babylonian mystery schools, as it said in Genesis 6. And what Jesus himself said, that in those final days, it will be like as in the days of Noah. And what were they doing? Child sacrifice? And what else were they doing?
It's funny because, you know, she's presented as this great Dr. Tenpenny, but she flips back and forth between speaking about her supposed medical credentials and knowledge, which are shaky, versus just making religious claims, where then it's like, well, so it's more of like a pastor then. It's not really, what does it really matter that she's Dr. Tenpenny if what she's talking about is Noah and Babylonians and Baal and all of these different things? This is a dangerous woman. I don't exactly know what licensing she's subject to. It should be investigated, and it should be explored whether she actually is worthy of that license. But the question I really continue to come away with is, are we talking about a grifter here? Or are we talking about a sick woman? Are we talking about a liar? Are we talking about someone who's confused? What is it really about? I'm curious to hear from you. I have the most outrageous clip for you from this judge, Bruce Schrader. Schrader. Everybody tells me a different. Every time I pronounce it one way, I get an email saying it's the other one. So I'll say Schrader, kind of a middle ground on him. In the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, talking about when he had a black in his jury. It's, there are things about this guy that we could say are relevant to the case substantively that we are concerned with. And there's things about this guy that just make him seem kind of like a wacky guy. And what this is about is the fact that on the day that the jury started deliberating, and as of this moment, the jury continues to deliberate into day 3 about the 5 charges against Kyle Rittenhouse, the judge, you had a pool of 18 jurors. And they all watched all of the testimony and looked at all of the evidence. But only 12 actually participate in the deliberations. So on the first day of deliberations, they had to choose 6 of the 18 to serve as alternates, meaning they stay at the courthouse day after day without deliberating in case anything happens to the 12 jurors that are actually taking part in the deliberation. The way they selected the 6 to come out is they had a tumbler, almost like if you had like a lottery, and they tumbled the names, pieces of paper with the juror numbers on them. And they actually had Kyle Rittenhouse reach in and select the 6 people that would be removed from the 18. And a lot of people in the media thought that was weird. Why? It's almost like a game show. Why is Kyle Rittenhouse himself doing it? And the judge has a perfectly reasonable explanation, which is there have been times in the past where when it wasn't, when we were doing it, when it was the clerk, for example, doing it, you would have an outcome that raised eyebrows. Like, for example, the one black potential juror being the one that is removed. And it's like, oh my goodness, it looks like racial bias. So the judge explains that in order to prevent that, he says, well, we'll just let the defendant do it so that we can't be accused of hand-picking juries based on race or any other features. But he bizarrely, in telling the story, says that when they did this once, what came up was the black. And it just is so odd to hear him talk this way. Take a look at this.
It was a big case. I think it was a murder case, but I'm not sure. And there was a black defendant, and there were 13 jurors, one of whom was black. And when the clerk, the government official, drew the name out of the tumbler, it was a black. The black.
It was a black, and it was the black.
Only black. There was nothing wrong with it. It was all okay. But what do they talk about? Optics nowadays? Is that the word for things? That was a bad optic, I thought.
Yeah. Also, bad optics is referring to it was a black. A black.
I think people feel better when they have control.
Yeah. This is completely reasonable. It's what the substance is completely reasonable. I'm not saying this guy is a racist or the racist, but the way in which he talks about a black and the black makes me cringe. It really does. And this is just, again, he's just there's 2 sides to this guy. He seems like a very quirky, strange guy singing songs during the trial, doing Jeopardy questions with people in the crowd, freaking out and yelling at the cameras about coverage on television, all these just very, very strange things. And then there are also the alleged biases that are being ascribed to the judge when it comes to evidence standards, depending on whether the evidence is presented by the prosecution or by the defense. his evaluation of different aspects of the trial and questions to witnesses, speculative questions, etc. Okay, that's a whole other thing. But what a wacky guy. I am very much looking forward to when this trial is done and we can move on from it. And we are standing by for the verdict literally as we speak. We may be minutes from the verdict. We may be hours, could be days still to go. We will see. We have a voicemail number, and that number is 219-2-DAVID-P. I want to warn you, I am going to play for you now what I believe is the most xenophobic voicemail I've ever received. It's about me. The caller is calling it about me. Okay. I'm not going to say anything else. Let's listen to it. Then I will tell you why I'm highlighting it, and I'll tell you a little more about it.
You know what the trouble is with America, Pacman, is people like you from South America that are coming over the border by millions, disease-infected pigs that destroyed their own country. Now they want to go and destroy my country. Instead of worried about us Christians in the Republican Party, why don't you do something about stopping all those sorry son of a bitches coming over or coming up from South America, just like you. You know what? I want to see every one of you run out of this country. You're the sorriest son of a bitches that have ever been let into this country. If you're really an American, you would do something about it. But I know where you're from, you cockroach.
Why am I highlighting this? So, of course, what this guy says is wrong. You know, my family didn't come over the border. We came with a work visa for my dad and green cards, and I'm a U.S. citizen. The reason I'm highlighting this is that it seems lost on this guy that I came over in the exact same. We know who this guy is. Okay, we know exactly who this guy is. We're calling him Tulsa Chris. He's not actually from Tulsa. He's from a different part of Oklahoma. We know exactly who this guy is, and we're calling him Tulsa Chris. Just, you know, that's what we're calling him. Tulsa Chris, based on what we know, is not Native American. And what that means is that at some point, someone in his family did the exact same thing that my family did, right? At some point, someone in his ancestry came from a different country. And then eventually you had the first generation of his family that was born here. But the argument he's making about me, I came here legally as well, is the exact same argument that at some point could have been made against his family. And when we talk about the immigration situation in the U.S., and there's a lot to talk about: DACA, border, overstayed visas, work visas, industries that depend on documented and undocumented workers, crime rates among documented immigrants, undocumented immigrants, and natural-born U.S. citizens. All of these are all issues we talk about, and they're important issues. But it seems completely missing for some people, like Tulsa Chris, that they were in the same position at some point in time. And you would think that that would get them to re-examine and say, wait a second. Presumably, he doesn't believe his family was cockroaches that should have been sent somewhere else. Maybe it's a racial thing. I don't know. Maybe European versus South America. I don't know. There's probably more there. But the hypocrisy and the ignorance to that reality is part of what is very, very disturbing about these folks. So there's Tulsa Chris with a message of me going back to where I came from. I'm an American citizen, so that I don't think there's any changing that. We're going to talk on the bonus show today about the censure of Paul Gosar and some very strange things he did after being censured for sharing that video of AOC getting killed in anime format. We're going to talk about a Republican-backed bill to decriminalize marijuana federally. And we will talk about another possibility for why gas prices are going up. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. Sign up at joinpacman.com and we will see you then. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman.